CNN reporter Clarissa spoke with members of the Taliban outside the U.S. Embassy in Kabul following their capture of the capital. One Taliban fighter expressed that they were there to maintain law and order and said America had been in the country long enough. Ward's interview made the rounds on Twitter after she made this remark. Let's watch.
They're just chanting death to America, but they seem friendly at the same time. It's utterly bizarre.
Culture editor at The Federalist, Emily Jashinsky, joins us now to discuss. Emily, welcome back to the show.
Good to be here.
So I'm actually going to take Ward's side on this one. I think it's important to just kind of report things as you see them, no matter how bizarre they might be, rather than try to cram them into a preconceived notion that we might have. But I'm curious what your reaction was, both to the clip and also to the reaction online to it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I actually fell for the Twitter clickbait, but when you watch the entire segment in context, it's actually a really, really, really helpful package. Her comments live to the anchors are extremely helpful as she answers her questions. And what she was tapping into is this is an American reporter around a smiling group of members of the Taliban who are chanting death to America while they're also engaging in a conversation with an American reporter. That is bizarre, and it's completely newsworthy and worth saying to point it out. So, I mean, maybe there was a better way to say it, but who cares? This was one of the dumb things that we got sucked into because of Twitter that we didn't need to even be talking about. And yet it sucked a big part of, I think, Twitter's discourse up yesterday. I think it was a pretty brave report. I think it was a pretty substantive report. Well done.
Emily, couldn't agree more. And I saw, Senator Ted Cruz came out and criticized her and of course, CNN is siding with the Taliban. And it just feels like a cheap shot. I watched the rest of the interview, and moments later, as a woman on the streets in war-torn Kabul, she goes up to the Taliban and interviews them and starts questioning them over women being forced to wear the niqab, so the full face covering, not just a hijab head covering. I mean, that takes some real courage to do that in her position, and presumably having limited security with her. So, I mean, again, just another example of the media and the Twitter sphere and the pundit class kind of jumping to criticisms when you have a journalist actually doing the hard work of reporting. Yeah,
and that's a problem, is that a lot of our conversations just aren't targeted, and a huge issue is Twitter itself. When we think about all of these conversations, so many of them go back to silliness on Twitter, and that's just really pathetic. And so on the one hand, I would not put it past CNN. CNN's history and record on these issues is absolutely atrocious. So I completely understand why people are reflexively, seeing one thing, and then when you watch it in context, it's different. So I get the reflex there, because CNN has been absolutely atrocious. But at the same time, I think we all, literally every single one of us, needs to be more we need to do the thing where we pause and watch every single thing that we really tweet about, instead of just jumping immediately, because you don't even know what you don't know until you watch everything.
Yeah, can I just jump in and say that death to, when Middle Easterners say death to America, it doesn't really mean what we think it means. They say death to traffic. So I just want to kind of bring that context in there, that to them it's not, it means something a bit different. It has a different meaning to them.
Well, and again, to Emily's point, they're saying that while smiling and willingly talking to the American journalist there. Listen, I have no doubts that the Taliban would like to see more Americans dead, and they've been killing Americans for 20 years. But I think that the point was absolutely accurate in the moment. And Emily, I want to ask you about something else that you highlighted on the very disastrous platform of Twitter, which was a clip from Chairman Milley testifying on Capitol Hill, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And what Twitter gravitated to from this, hours-long congressional hearing was comments he made about critical race theory. But he also offered what was a bit of a stark warning about the future of Afghanistan and its ability to hold. Talk to us about what the media missed in that.
Yeah, so I went and looked back at the transcript yesterday of Milley's congressional testimony in late June, and it is really interesting because Liz Cheney and a couple of other members pressed him on Afghanistan, and he's playing pretty coy, but he also doesn't dismiss the possibility that the country could fall to the Taliban. And what's sort of interesting going back to that is that it isn't just that Twitter gravitated towards his now infamous comments about critical race theory. It's that was then reflected in the media coverage. And that's how Twitter wags the tail of the media dog, right? Like Twitter catches something and then it gets reflected in our broader media conversation. So there's a pretty tiny fraction of the population that is on Twitter on a daily basis. But the media at large, we're all reading the media every day. Some people read it less than others, and I envy them. But this gets the sort of echo chamber and the bubble that is Twitter then becomes a much bigger bubble, and it gets represented to everybody. So this very unrepresentative conversation is then treated as representative in the media because things start going viral and the conversations there start going viral. So is it totally different from the newsrooms of yore? In a sense, no, but in another sense, it connects everybody. It's basically like journalists and elite Slack. And that's, it's fine if you have some self-awareness about it, but when you just project the critical race theory coverage of Milley into the bulk of the coverage of his congressional testimony, which is what happened, it just shows how decadent we are and how we're so easily roped into these substanceless conversations. It's not that there's no substance, I shouldn't say that to this debate. Like, I don't blame conservatives for stopping and saying, wait, you're a general. Be a general. Like, what are you talking about? I don't blame people for disagreeing with that and having that conversation, nor do I blame, people in different positions in the military for saying, well, you should think about these things. So I get it. I understand that. But he was talking about Afghanistan, too, and it just seems wildly disproportionate. And I think that's an indication of decadence, how disproportionate our priorities are.
Well, and I'd go a step further, too, in that congressional testimony, which I happened to watch. I used to, full disclosure, work for Chairman Milley, but that was a question asked by Congressman Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz is somebody who's made a career of being much more a cable news talking head and a Twitter warrior than a serious legislator. So a disproportionate amount of time was given to that, 4-minute exchange rather than a substantive, serious conversation over the deteriorating situation coming in Afghanistan that serious lawmakers like Liz Cheney were asking about. And I think that's just indicative of sort of this moment in Congress, this moment in our media, this moment in social media as well, where it's kind of what is the flashy, sexy thing of the day that gets attention, and we miss the much more substantive, serious story behind it.
Yeah.
Well, it really, I think. Sorry, go ahead, Emily.
No, go ahead, Kim. Go ahead.
It really just the real issue is the fact that media news is run by advertising dollars. So until we can get, it always kind of boils down to money, right? Always about the money. But until we can get the money out of news, which I don't even know how that's possible, they're going to continue to go after the clickbait. They're going to go after what is going to get them the views. And right now what we're seeing in, with newspapers kind of dying off and going into digital and even cable news having to compete with YouTube, everybody is looking for that sensational clickbait rather than getting into substantive conversations that actually matter, things that actually affect our lives, things that are important. And they instead have us thinking that all of these other things that aren't really, I haven't come across like critical race theory in my life yet. Like no one's really trying to tell me that I need to apologize for the white half of my ancestry or something. I'm not, I haven't run into that in my daily life, but I do run into other issues that we're just not covering. And that is because of this advertising-based media entity that we, or kind of structure that we have our media based on. Our news is based on this.
I think, and even deeper than that, it's the media, the economy in news media right now is splintering and nichifying to the point where the New York Times is only responsive. It purports to cover the entire country, but it's only responsive to its coastal sort of NPR tote bag subscriber base. And that's where there has been room for shows like this to open up and to be responsive to this total market demand for like more substantive and more free conversations. And I think that's great. But when you have these organizations like the Times and CNN that still purport to be the mainstream and to cover the entire country, it is really dangerous. And I don't think we can shirk the blame off Twitter at all. I think Twitter is singularly responsible for shaping politicians and shaping the discourse on a daily basis in an extremely unhealthy way. And I think, the career of Matt Gaetz speaks to that.
And speaking of the substance, before we wrap, I want to play a little bit more of that CNN clip that you were referring to.
As soon as we leave our compound, it's clear who is now in charge. Taliban fighters have flooded the capital. Smiling and victorious, they took this city of 6 million people in a matter of hours, barely firing a shot.
This is a sight I honestly thought I would never see. Scores of Taliban fighters, and just behind us, the U.S. Embassy compound.
Some carry American weapons. They tell us they're here to maintain law and order. Everything is under control. Everything will be fine, the commander says. Nobody should worry.
What's your message to America right now?
America already spent enough time in Afghanistan. They need to leave, he tells us. They already lost lots of lives and lots of money. People come up to them to pose for photographs.
They're just chanting death to America, but they seem friendly at the same time. It's utterly bizarre.
Yeah, this is a perfect example of how we get baited into conversations that are distractions from the substance, and we didn't need to have that conversation. Maybe her producers had a little conversation with her, and just to make sure everything was in context, because that was a pre-recorded package and it got included deliberately in it. But we didn't, as Twitter, as the Twitter sphere, we didn't need to go back and forth about this. And the only reason we did is because somebody pulled it and took it without the full context. And again, given CNN's track record, a lot of people jumped onto that. It's totally just being baited. It's baiting people into outrage. And these mechanisms, which I should add, addict us. By the way, they are meant to look literally like slot machine games. They addict us to that outrage. And so it's really easy for all of us. I mean, nobody's immune from that, to just chime in and jump in and then wait to see how other people respond and to see where their conversation goes, because we were baited into something silly in the first place. So it's hard to actually overstate how big of a problem Twitter alone is for our politics.
Death to Twitter.
And traffic.
Emily, we always enjoy your perspective. Thank you so much, and please join us again.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Next on Rising, Marine veteran Lucas Kuntz joins us. He served in Iraq and Afghanistan and gives us his thoughts on what's happening in the Middle East. Stay tuned.